Okay, good morning, everyone. We had some mazel tovs posted. So before I hit record, I'll read the mazel tovs. Let's see. I know the first one was Yitzi Pollinger became a grandmother. A Bubby. Rifki writes, wishing you endless Hasidic nachas. And Fega Rachel Golem, mazel tov, my daughter and son-in-law Itzik and Dova Tiffenbrunn in New Jersey had a baby girl. And those are the mazel tovs in the chat. If there's other mazel tovs and anybody wants to unmute and take a minute to share, that would be great. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I know the day after Yantif is sometimes a little bit challenging to get back to life. I'm going to put the light on. I don't have my light on. I just want to be able to see my. Okay, sorry about that. I just want to be able to see the Sicha a little better. So I think everyone's going to really enjoy. It was definitely really enjoyable to prepare it. And let's start. I'm going to set record. And if anybody wants to put their camera on, right now I don't think anyone has their camera on, but if anybody doesn't mind, let me know. I mean, just put it on, but if you don't, that's okay too. Okay, record to the cloud. Okay, good morning. I don't know if you say Shavua Tov or not, but good morning. So we are learning the second Sicha on Parshas Nasai, and let's get started. Ne'amar b'Parshasenu, Vayihi b'yom kalos Moshe lakim et hamishkan, vayimshach oto vayikadesh oto, gomer v'akriv nisiyei Yisrael gomer v'yavios korban lifnei Hashem sheish agalot tzav v'shnei asar bakar agala al shnei hanesiim v'shor lechad v'yakrivu otam lifnei hamishkan. So this is right from the Parsha. It says in the Parsha, on the day that Moshe finished setting up the Mishkan, and he inaugurated it, and he sanctified it. And the princes of Israel, so the princes are the leaders of each tribe, but somebody called a Nasi, I'm going to translate it as prince. They brought a sacrifice to Hashem. They brought 6 covered carriages and 12 cattle. It was one carriage per for every 2 princes. So it's 12 tribes, 12 princes, 6 covered carriages. So that's 1 carriage for every 2. V'shor le'achad, and since we said it was 12 ox, so that's 1 ox per tribe. Vayakrivoto lifnei hamishkan, and they sacrificed it, or they donated it to the Mishkan. So those are the basic words from the pasuk. So the Rebbe is going to ask the question. First, he says it's something doesn't make sense here. So we see that in general, with the donations to the Mishkan, it was done in a very, very generous way, so much so that it was like enough, like sufficient. They almost had excess, or they did have excess. So how could it be Shadavka Nisiyei Yisrael, that specifically the princes of Israel, the leaders, Simsanu Nidavas Agalot, they each gave half of a wagon, 6 wagons for 12 tribes. Each one chipped in for half a wagon. It doesn't mean chipped in, but it seems almost stingy after there was so much overflow of excessive giving. And all of a sudden, when it comes to the wagons, we'll just share one. Each
Where's the
sorry?
No.
Okay. Each tribe only gave half a wagon. Agalachat al shnei hanesiim. As it says, 1 wagon for every 2 princes. Yeter al kain, and even more so. And this is, if anyone has a chumash in front of them, this is, I didn't bring the chumash with me, but this is Perek Zayin Gimel, Pasuk Gimel. And the Rebbe is going to quote Sifri and the Medrash, which Rashi brings out. Yetzer al kan kinoda lenibnas nesim ita b'Sifri v'b'Medrash. Speaking as it's written in Sifri and in the Medrash, huba b'Perish Rashi, which is brought down in Rashi. Ma'ra'u hanisiim b'malachas hamishkan lo hitnatu tchila. So what happened? The princes saw that in the construction of the Mishkan, they weren't the first ones to give. B'malachas hamishkan lo hitnabdu tchila. They were not the first ones to give. Kach amru hanisiim yitnabdu tzibor mash yitnabdu v'mash mechasrin anu mashlimim. So they said, we'll let the people give, and whatever is not given, whatever's lacking, then we'll fill in and we'll give at that point. But then they saw that the people brought so much, there was nothing left for them to give, basically. As it says, and they said, as it says, there was enough, there was excess. So they said, what are we supposed to do now? So they brought the precious stones and the precious rocks for the Cohen's breastplate. Therefore, this time around, they gave first when it came to the inauguration of the Mishkan, not the building of the Mishkan. Kolomar nidivas hanisim b'yom klos Moshe lakim es hamishkan ba'e kidei litaken es ma shelo hitnavdu kidvi techila. Kidboi, sorry. As it says that the princes, on the day that Moshe finished the Mishkan, they came and they did this in order to, the Rebbe uses the word litaken, in order to rectify what they didn't donate in the first place when they were building the Mishkan. They were the last ones. They said, let everyone give before us, and then we'll fill in. But what had happened was everyone gave so much, there was nothing left to fill in. So the same said, we're not making that mistake again. And being that it uses the word litaken, it's the implication that that was something that needed to be fixed, something that needed to be rectified. Libam avor hamishkan kidabai b'shlemas. Ve'echem heviu zos b'nibat chatzi agala al yedei kol nesiei. Okay, so now we see this time around, they said, we're not letting that happen again. We're going to give as needed, fully, right up front. So how could it be that if that was the attitude, if that was the motivation, that last time we sort of missed the opportunity and we want to do it in the best way possible, we're going first this time? So if that's the starting point, why would they give half a wagon? You'd think they would really give a beautiful donation and in excess, with splendor, in all the best ways, not like we'll chip in for half a plate, type of thing. So the question, I hope, makes sense. Okay, let's make the question even deeper. So according to just the basic understanding or the contextual understanding, and as so too it's explained in the Medrash, the princes brought 6 covered wagons, and 12 cattle, in order to carry the Mishkan. And it says in the Torah that Moshe split up the wagons according to how they would be used. Libnei Gershon et shtei hagalot ves arba habakar, v'libnei Merari is arba hagalot ves shmonas habakar. So he gave 4. So to the Gershon family, he gave 2 wagons and 4 ox. And to the Merari family, he gave 4 wagons and 8 oxen. Meaning they gave exactly 6 wagons. And these are the different families within the tribe of Levi that had different jobs to do. So the Gershon family got 2 of the 6, and the Merari family got 4 of the 6. V'zot b'shal she'eta yadua midasam hagdola beyoter shel hakrashim v'ha'amudim. The memela afshar haya lishar es mishkalam. Lekozo yesh losif es kol mea hadanim shekol echad mehem kikar shel kaidesh mishkelo. And this is because there's a large load to carry, and it's all measured out exactly. They knew the exact size of the crushim, which are the beams, and the amudim, which are the pillars. And on top of that, for, they had the measurements, they each measured an exact weight. And they had to add on top of that 100 sockets, and each one was a kikar of weight. And if you look at the footnote number 13, it says that they were the weight of 3,000 shekels. So there's a very specific setup. I posted those pictures. Let's see if I can find the pictures. How do I do a screen share? Let's see if I could do this. Okay, so here's one set of pictures, very specific how it's all piled up. And in the English PDF of the Sicha, there's also pictures of how they piled it up, but they know the exact weight and they know everything that needs to go on these wagons. And specifically according to the calculation that's in the Gemara, that the length of a wagon was exactly 5 amos. And the width of a wagon was exactly 2.5 amos. So you have 5 by 2.5. And therefore, the beams had to be put in a very specific way. And there's like the pictures I showed, there's a few different versions of exactly how they were put in, but back to back. Shnaimasar krashim al kol agala. And it was 12 beams on every single wagon. V'hadavar af garam lekach she'echad mibnei halevim hutzrach lahashgiach v'letaken et haseder zo al zo shalotipol ha'elyona. And it was so much so, maybe you could say so precarious, that one of the Levim had to follow the wagons and make sure that they didn't fall, that the top one didn't fall off. The kol haderech hu mahalech acharei ha'agala. And the whole entire way that it traveled, he would walk after the wagon. V'kesheroeh otan mishtalpus el tocha avir rats l'toch blitas hakrashim shebetzadehem. And if he would see one of them was sliding off towards the opening, he would go, and if one was, he would run after it if one was sticking out, and he would push it back to place. Ad shemegia le'emes ha'avir shebenehem. And he would go into there was an opening between the two wagons. He would go into that opening. B'dochek atzmo lamod bechatzi ama ad sheyachzir hanishpel u'mekoyma va'ad sedara. And there was a half an amma between the two wagons, and he would go into that half amma opening, and he would fix everything until the beam that was falling was put back into its proper place. My husband told me to try to picture one of those Dr. Seuss books with everything piled up and piled up and piled up. Or if you just think of, a family that's overloaded for a vacation and they're piling everything on top of the car. But it's so precarious that they have a Levi that's running after the wagons to make sure that nothing falls. And if it does, he's there to push it back to place. So on top of what we just had, we have the crushim, the pillars, we have the beams. Sorry, the krashim are the beams, excuse me. The amudim are the pillars, and we have the sockets. And on top of this, amudei hamishkan v'adanav, v'shishim amudei hachatzer, v'shishim adneihem nechoshes. We have 60 pillars from the chatzer and another 60 sockets. Asher es kulam hayitzrichim lahaniach al gabei arba agalot. And all this had to be put on those 4 wagons. Because we said already that 2 were for the Gershon family, for the Merari family has the 4, and all of this has to get on it. Again, we had those pictures. Let me see if I could show another picture. No, that's the wrong picture. Stop share. I don't know. I have a little too much. But it's in the PDF of the Sicha in English. There's another picture of how it's all piled up. So this whole setup that everything is precariously balanced and everything is one exact, so much so that you have like the Levi running after it, making sure it doesn't fall. This is the complete opposite of wealth and splendor and bounty and tremendous regality that existed in the Mishkan and the Mikdash. As we know, there's a saying, "Ein anius b'makom ashirus." There's no such thing as poverty in a place of splendor. I don't know, like sometimes here I think about that. There's some houses here that are really fancy, and where I live in Queens, just not many, but there are some that are really, really beautifully done. And sometimes you see like a half broken folding chair on the front porch of this like mansion or something like that. And you're like, "Ein anios b'makom ashiros." How could it be that somebody who has this gorgeous mansion, they don't have a proper chair to sit on? It just looks funny. Obviously, there's a practical reason for it also, but that principle comes from the Mishkan and the Mikdash, that it was a place of tremendous wealth and tremendous regality and splendor, like a palace. Excuse me, that how could it be that something would be broken down or something would be very simplistically done? So this idea of like very minimal amounts of wagons, just for them, and everything has to be piled exact. And so much so you have this Levi chasing it down the road, so to speak, to make sure nothing falls. It doesn't seem to be fitting with this being like a extremely elevated regal space. והרי אלו היו עגלות רבות יותר, לא היה צורך להניח פרשים רבים כל כך זה על גבי זה. And had you just had a few more wagons, you wouldn't have to have put the beams so specific that it was one on top of the other. והייתה nimna hatircha hashkiach aleim, and you also would have prevented this whole tircha, this extra work of having to supervise them. Kol haderech beit holechet karshe hamishkan al gabe hagalot. The whole entire way, having the lady chase after them, supervise to make sure that the beams of the Mishkan don't fall over from the backs of the wagons. Up to Seif Bet. בפשוטו של מקרא לכאורה היה אפשר לתרץ זאת בפשטוס, ולכן לא פירש רש"י דבר על כך. So simply speaking, contextually, the Rebbe is now going to offer us an answer that you could have explained it very contextually based on the storyline, and therefore Rashi doesn't talk about it. La'ayel beparshas Truma. So previously what we learned in Parshas Truma, B'kesher l'kach shayu atzei shitim b'nidavas hamishkan, when it said that they gave atzei shitim, acacia wood, as a donation for the Mishkan, we wondered over there, where'd they get the wood from? Perish Rashi explains, V'me'ein hayu lahem b'midbar, perish Rabbi Tanchuma, Yaakov Avinu tzipa b'ruach HaKodesh, Sha'atidin Yisrael livnot Mishkan b'midbar, v'hevi arazim lemitzrayim, v'natam v'tiva levanav, litalem imahem keshut mitzrayim. So where'd they get the wood? Well, Rashi told us over there, in the name of Rabbi Tanchuma, that Yaakov Avinu, he saw with prophecy, with Ruach HaKodesh, that in the future, the Jewish people would be building a Mishkan in the desert, a sanctuary in the desert. So therefore he brought cedar trees to Mitzrayim, to Egypt, and he planted them. And he commanded his children to uproot them and to take them with them when they left Mitzrayim. So that's where they got the wood from. V'michan lamadnu, she'af al pi shemevizas Mitzrayim, mevizas hayam, nisharu b'nei Yisrael v'asirus muflag shel kesef v'zahav chulo v'avanim tovot. So here we learn that even though they were able to, the looting that they took from Egypt, that during, I guess, Cheshach, when they got all of the precious gems, and also at the Yam Suf, when the Mitzrayim drowned, and they were able to get stuff from them as well, they become very, very wealthy with a lot of gold and silver and precious gems. However, Mikol Makom lo hayu lahem b'midbar atzei shitim. So despite having so much wealth and gems and gold and silver, they didn't have acacia wood. They didn't have a natural source of wood in the desert. Ella al yedei havat arazim me'eretz Yisrael l'Mitzrayim. But rather they got the wood, which was, I guess, a limited resource. They got it from the cedar trees that were brought down to Egypt from Israel. Nitiatam sham, tipol b'gidulam. They planted them in Mitzrayim. They tended to their growth. B'meshech matayim ve'eser shanim. for the duration of 210 years. And they brought that wood with them into the desert. So from this wood, which was obviously very precious and a limited resource, they had to make so many different things. They had to make the beams for the Mishkan and all the different tools, anything that needed to be made from wood. So therefore, they didn't have that much wood. They were very wealthy, but they didn't have a lot of wood. So they had to minimize and give only 6 wagons. So therefore, sorry, I read that line already. So therefore, the number of wagons was exact because they were limited. So that's not the answer we're going to take, but that's what you might have thought. About doichek litaretz ken, but this is the Rebbe doesn't like this answer. This is a stretch to say this exact answer. Sheharei hagalot ba rak mitzad nidivas hanisim mibli kol hagbala sheyu dafka atze shitim. To say that the wagons came only, this is the only source of wagons from the donation of the priests, without the limitations of the wood. The timuva bechlal lomar she'if shar haya limso b'mitzrayim atzei chazakim kedei laso mahem od aglo rabot. Who's to say that in Egypt they couldn't have found other wood? I know we said that they were using the wood that was planted, but who's to say that for wagons they couldn't have found a different source of wood? The laha'ir memamre chazal shebnei Yisrael kanu kama dvarim. And also, the Chazal teach us that the Jewish people, they bought things from traveling nations in the desert. So there were other resources. So even though we thought Bipashtas and contextually that they didn't have a lot of wood, who's to say that that's actually the reality they were dealing with? Seif Gimel. The Sifri, Ba'al Derek Zeh b'Medrash. So in the Sifri, and this is a similar thing in the Medrash, and don't worry, later we're going to parse the Sifri and the Medrash and say where they differ, but right now they're on the same page. Lamdu mahapasuk kach mi'itam. It learns from the verse, take from within you. Ba'u ba'amdu lifnei hamishkan v'lo kibel Moshe mehen ad shenar de'emar lo mepi hakadosh kach mi'itam hu haskima dasan ladasa elyona. Okay, so if we looked at the Rashi, we would see that they came and the priest gave this wood as a donation to the Mishkan, but Moshe didn't accept it right away until Hashem said to him, take it from them. And then he agreed, obviously, with Hashem, with the Das HaElyona, the supernal knowledge, and Moshe, of course, submitted to what Hashem told him to do. But his initial reaction was not to take it. But from this, we learn that the donation of the wagons was exactly what Hashem wanted. This was Kedas HaElyon. This was exactly as Hashem commanded. V'me'mela gam misaprim v'al derech hakorbanos shekrivu hanisiim behemshech lazeh. And so too, the sacrifices that the princes gave as the parsha continues, l'chanukas hamizbeach, to inaugurate the mizbeach, the altar, shekama prati mehem shenimnu b'divrei Razal. Many of the details are enumerated in the teachings of the rabbis, v'perish Rashi, and according to Rashi, hayu horash sha'a. This was a temporary instruction, horasha'a. It was an instruction just for this time. V'ledugnak teres yachid, just like the incense was done differently the first time. Asher huktaru al gabe hamizbeach hachitzon, masha lo matzinu b'makom acher. Like incense was burnt on the outer altar, just this time during the inauguration, but we never see this happen again. V'muvan shekol horasha hayta alpi haskamas Moshe das Hashem. So we see that all of these temporary instructions, these things that were done one time, it was according to Moshe's instruction, which is obviously das Hashem. It was very specific. Nothing is random or arbitrary or let's just do it this way. No, if Moshe agreed to it, then this is the will of Hashem. If this is what Moshe instructed. Now we're gonna look at the brackets. So since this came, even though this came specifically from the princes, as it says, and the princes sacrificed. And Moshe wouldn't accept it until it came from the voice of Hashem. Yakrivu es korbanam l'chanukas hamizbeach. It's obvious that after Hashem says to Moshe, sacrifice their sacrifices for the inauguration of the altar, haytazo hakrava al pit sivui Hashem. That this sacrifice was according to the will of Hashem exactly, and so too, exact same principle would apply to the donation of the wagons. So what we're building up here is the idea that the 6 wagons was significant, and that it wasn't because they didn't have enough wood, they didn't have enough resources, and it wasn't because they were being a little stingy in some capacity, but it was Ladas Hashem was exactly what Hashem wanted, the 6 wagons. And the fact that it was maybe hard to load them and had to be done in a very specific way so nothing fell, and you had to assign the Levium, the Levi to follow behind, all of this is exactly what Hashem wanted. Aval lo mistaber lomar shemispar galot haya chuka v'gzeira hakatuv. Okay, so we haven't gotten there yet. So the Rebbe is now saying, but it doesn't make sense to say that the number of wagons was a chok and gzeras hakatuv was exactly like commanded from Hashem, bli shum tam, without any reason. But rather, it seems the opposite of that, as we said above. As it says that this number was according to them, was according to the Nesiim, the princes. And after they donated the 6 wagons, so then it became revealed that this is Hashem's will. But they came up with that first. So how can we say this is, we haven't sufficiently proven this yet, that this is exactly what Hashem wanted. And with regard to the korbanot, the sacrifices that were given to inaugurate the mizbeach, the altar, which was only done that one time during the time of inauguration. It wasn't done later. It was a one-time occurrence. Su kazeh shel korbanot ve'ofen kazeh shel hakra b'harei afal pi shadavar chaya harosh sha'a yesh ta'amim v'ramazim l'sug hakorbanot shel hanasim l'misparam kimuvar b'divrei chazal v'arucha. So even though it was a one-time occurrence, this type of sacrifice, even though it was again, like we said, the temporary instruction of one time, there was a reason, there were hints, there were specific details that were extremely meaningful from the princes, as has been explained at length by the Chachamim. Every single thing was relevant and every detail was important. So too, we have to say in our case, b'nedavas ha'agalot, sheyesh tam v'hasbar lekach, shenedavas ha'agalot v'habakar ha'eta b'mi'ut v'b'tzimson. So too, because this is for the Mishkan, and it's just like everything else, every single detail has a reason. And there's an explanation for every single thing, for the donation of the wagons and the cattle, the fact that it was, as it says here, b'mi'ut v'b'tzimtzum. It was small in nature. It was exact. Tzimtzum usually means contracted, but it was the opposite of generous. It was exactly what was needed. Shehu lichora hefech haklal b'inyanei hamikdash, which is kind of the opposite of the rest of the way the mikdash was constructed. Ein anios b'makom hashirush, kanal sofsif aleph. As we already said, the principle is that there's no poverty or there's no lacking in a place of wealth, which we said at the end of Seif Aleph. Shechen tzarich haya liot b'nidavazo. So therefore, this had to be exactly the way it was done. It's not possible that they were being stingy when it came to the mikdash. V'kan muchrach l'hadiyah b'gemara, and this is indicated explicitly in the Gemara. Shahaya nogea kan. Behadgasha shaita midas hagalot b'diuk, that the exact number and the size and the length of the wagons was specific. V'vedafka lo arucha yoter or rachba yoter min hamakom hadorish lahanacha hakrashim. And specifically, it wasn't any longer or any wider than the exact amount of space that was needed for the beams. V'shelo yu makom miyuter l'lo tzurach hakrashim. And there shouldn't have been any extra space that wasn't needed, that wasn't used up, specifically by the beams. Al-kach she'orech agalav chamesh amot. So as we said, the length of the wagon was exactly 5 amas. Hakshu Gemara lama li arba b'flag sagi. So the Gemara is going to ask, why was it 5 when it could have been 4.5? V'haterutu ki heichi delo lidchuko krashim. And the answer is not to squish the beams. That half a amma gave space that the beam shouldn't be crushed. And in the same thing, we said that the wagons were 2.5 ammas wide. Lama li be'emes v'plaga sagi. So the Gemara asks, why wasn't it 1.5 ammas wide? Hu k'dei heichi delo liduj krashim. And again, in order that the board should not teeter, it says, or sway or shift back and forth. So we have a half a amma extra width and a half a amma extra length, so that there should be enough space. V'yesh lomar habir bazeh behektem. So sorry, seif dalid. V'yesh lomar habir bazeh behektem echad hashinuim bein lashon hasifri l'lashon hamedrash b'maimar chazal hanal seif aleph. Okay, so I mentioned earlier that we were gonna look at the difference between the Sifri and the Medrash. That was already mentioned in Seif Aleph, so let's go do that. The Sifri ita v'ki ma'ra'u nisim l'hit nadev l'chatchila kan b'malachas hamishkan lo hit navdu b'tchila. So in the Sifri it says that the princes looked around and they said, what can we donate up front? Because last time when they were building the Mishkan, they didn't donate in the beginning. It uses the word donate, lahit nadev. And this is the way that Rashi explains it, that what the Nisim gave was a donation. The ilu b'medrash, however, it's a little different in the medrash. Halashon hi lama nizdarez hanisim lavo v'lahakriv tchila. So the medrash opens up a question. Why did the princes go to sacrifice? It uses the word lahakriv, to sacrifice initially. However, last time in the construction of the Mishkan, they didn't go until the end. So the big difference here is that the Medrash, which Rashi quotes, uses the word donate, lahit nadev, and the Sifri uses the word lahakriv, to sacrifice, like a korban. But was it a donation or was it a sacrifice, what they gave to the Mishkan, the 6 wagons and the 12 oxen? So let's explain one of the differences. But I guess there's many differences. That's the one that the Rebbe is going to bring out. One of the differences between the Medrash and the Sifri. Korban. So according to the Sifri, the 6 wagons and the 12 oxen were not in the category of a korban, of a sacrifice. However, according to the Medrash, harehem lahakriv, they were considered a sacrifice. Begeter korban, kalashan hakatuv mamish, vevo el korbanam. In the category of a korban, as it says specifically, and they came towards the sacrifice. Bekehemshach divrei hamedrash, and the Medrash, which is the one that refers to it as a korban, continues. Kevan shenigmar hamishkan hikdimu v'haviu korban bizrizu sadahu dichtiv ve'kuvenisei Yisrael v'gomer. It says that when the Mishkan was finally finished and standing, they came and they brought a sacrifice quickly. as it says, and the princes of Israel sacrificed. So that makes a difference if the oxen and the wagons are considered sacrifices. גם בנוגע לדס המדרש, מצינו שנאמר להלן שם, והיה משה מתיירא שמע אחד מן הגלות נשברה, או אחד מן השרים מת, ונמצא קורבן של נסים פסול, אמר לו הקדוש ברוך הוא, והיו ניתן להם הווה ישו כמים לעולם. So in order to give us another proof text that this was considered a sacrifice and not just a donation, like a ritual sacrifice, we see in the Medrash that in this, as the Medrash continues, it says that Moshe was afraid that one of the wagons would break or one of the oxen would die, and the korban, the sacrifice of the princes, would become invalid. And this is a fear that Moshe has. So Hashem says to him, I will make them a timeless existence so that they would last forever. Again, this anecdote kind of shows us that according to the Medrash, these are regarded as a korban, as a sacrifice. ובהמשך המדרש שם הובא כמה דעות היכן הקירובים, בנוב הקירובים, בבייס העולמין הקרובים, or בגלגל. And as the Medrash continues, it brings many examples of it being a korban, and it says they were sacrificed in Nov, they were sacrificed in bebes ha'olmim, or in Galgal. Many different opinions of where the oxen are sacrificed. So again, if we are going according to the Medrash, what they gave, these 12 oxen, were considered a ritual sacrifice. Kolomar b'medrash gufa, yesh makom lilmod b'shnei ofanim. And even within the Medrash itself, you can learn it in two ways. Lefi hanemar b'tchilas ha-piska harishona b'medrash, lavo v'lahakriv, hakorban hu be'ikar b'habas hagavra. So according to one approach, what was really going on here? As it says, that they came to sacrifice, and the emphasis is on the person, is on the actual priest, or sorry, the prince, the initiative that the prince took, the overture that the prince made to sacrifice was the real accomplishment here. So that's one, that the emphasis of this ritual sacrifice is on the action taken by the priest, by the prince. I'm using the word priest sometimes by accident, but it's supposed to be a prince. V'lefi hapsika hashniya b'medrash nemar korban shel nesim pasol. But according to the second, another approach within the same medrash, as it says that in a phrase that it says that the sacrifice of the nesim became invalid. Gam hachetza sheviu hagalot ushnei asar bakar nichnas begeder hakorban. So here it says that it's the chetza, it's referring to the object itself. So these are two different ways of understanding what was holy over here. Was it the gavra? Was it the action and the intention and the overture of the prince? Or was it the animal, the object that was sacrificed? Was the action the holy part, the gavra, or was the object, the sacrifice that was actually holy? But either way, either one, l'kol hadeos lo hayu tzrichot liot ele sheish agalot. Nonetheless, was it the gavra, that it was the overture of the princes, or it was the chefsa, that was the actual objects that were brought? Nonetheless, they didn't need, according to this, understand there was no need for anything more than 6 wagons. Simsum, even though this is exact, the bare minimum. Which is the opposite of wealth and splendor. You know, I know we all just finished Yontif, and you bring out the food and it's like one dish and another dish and another dish until the table is so full there isn't, space for all the dishes, which is the opposite of if we would just, put out exactly what you need to be full. So Seif Hey, let's explain some of this. The Habir Bazeh, the explanation for all this is Lacharesh Mefarish b'medrash sham amru ma yeshanu lahavi halchu v'heviu agalot shayu nosim aleim es hamishkan. So according to the Medrash, the princes said to themselves, what is there left for us to bring? And they went and they brought the wagons that would carry the Mishkan. Mamshich, the Medrash continues, V'mina tan lahem et ha'etza hazot. Who told them go do this? They're wondering what is there left? The person who has everything. What gift can I give the person who has everything? What is there left to bring for the Mishkan? And who told them that wagons would be a great idea? Shevet Yisachar, the tribe of Yisachar. And how did they make their point? Shekach amru lahem, they said to them, Mishkan shasitem porachu ba'avir? They said, what do you think? The Mishkan, the sanctuary that you constructed, you think it's going to fly in the air? Ella hitnavdu agalot shetiyu nosimoto bahem. Rather, you should donate the wagons that's going to carry the Mishkan. Again, as much as that's a great line, and if you're trying to encourage maybe your children to help out, you say to them, what do you think? All the bags are just going to fly in the air? We have to lift them up and carry them properly. Obviously, the sarcasm for the sake of sarcasm was not the way of what we're going to be learning about. So there has to be a deeper understanding to what they were actually saying. But it is a great line that you can use. V'yesh lomar shehakavana v'zehi. So the intention of this comment, she'ein ze rak inyan chitzoni b'mishkan, that it wasn't just an extra aspect, an additional external aspect of the Mishkan. Emsa'i laset oto mimakom lamakom ela shehamishkan atzmo na'aseh chetza hanesias v'agalot. It's not just that these are the external capacity for how you're going to take the Mishkan from place to place, but rather that the Mishkan itself is not a complete project until you have the mode of transport, until you have the wagons. It's going to be defined that the Mishkan is a thing that is transported, that if the Mishkan is not transportable, or it's not a transported object, or it's not something that gets carried, then it's not the Mishkan. I don't know if this is a great example, but when I was preparing it, I was thinking a mobile home. If a mobile home isn't mobile, then it's just a home. It's not a mobile home. You know, part of the definition of being a mobile home is that it moves. If it's stationary, so it's not a mobile home. I don't know. That was just my thought. So if it doesn't work, just drop it. But what we're saying here is that the Mishkan, if it doesn't have a mode of transport, it's not the complete project. It's not the complete Mishkan. L'loha agalot hamishkan hu davar haporech ba'avir. As they said, the Mishkan is not something that is going to be transported by the air. This is going to fly in the air. Hagalot, but rather it's something transported by wagons. The Yud Beis Habakar Einam Rak Emsa'i Be'alma Kedei Laset at Hamishkan. And the 12 oxen, they're not just there randomly to pull the Mishkan, Mimakom Lamakom, Ella Hem Poalim Shinui V'Gamar B'Mishkan. But rather they created a change and a completion of the Mishkan, B'Chefsa de HaMishkan, to the object itself, to the Mishkan itself. Kevan Mishkan Nivne Be'oil Moed, V'lo Kibinyan Kavua, because the Mishkan itself was created to be the Oil Moed, to be a movable temple of worship and not a stationary building. Ella kedavar haholech mimakom lemakom al b'nei Yisrael, and it's something that was meant. The entire function or the entire purpose of it was that it should go from place to place. I said al. I think I said al before, to be im with the Jewish people. Hare kolzman she'ein agalot bebakar sheyu nosim aleim es hamishkan. So anytime that there weren't wagons and oxen that were able to transport the Mishkan, lo nigmara asiyas hamishkan. The Mishkan itself was not completed. Mishkan shesitem porachu ba'avir, and that initial Mishkan, right before the wagons and the oxen are all donated, that's this Mishkan. Like, what do you think? It's just going to fly in the air, which is not what the Mishkan is supposed to be. Now we're going to do the brackets at the end of Hay. So we see from this that the bringing of the wagons and the oxen was the completion of the building of the Mishkan. Me'ein po'elet hakorbanot b'mizbeach, shal yadam nischanech hamizbeach riv alav tmidim kesidran bechulo. And it was similar to the idea of the initial sacrifices that were given on the altar, which inaugurated the altar in order that it could be used going forward in the regular way that sacrifices would be given. And the inauguration of the altar was actually the completion of the building of the altar. והגלות והבקר לשאת את המשכן היו ביחס למשכן מעיין מה שהיו הקורבנות דחינך המזבח. So it's like an analogy. So too, the wagons and the oxen to transport the Mishkan were connected to the Mishkan in the way that the initial sacrifices that inaugurated the altar were connected to the altar. Ki al yadei hagalot habakar nishlam gamar asis hamishkan. Because through the wagons and the oxen, you've completed the creation, the making of the Mishkan. Okay, Seif Vav. Al pi hanal, muban shekeshem shebemishkan v'beis hamikdash gufa, af al pi shaita sham hanhaga shel ashiris v'harchava. So we learn from this that the Mishkan and also the Beis Hamikdash itself, that even though it was done in a way of wealth and bounty and regality, and it was meant to be like over the top, splendid, mikol makom, nonetheless, lo haya shum prat biprat diprat shelo notel avor peula or inyan mesuyam benishkan. Despite the fact that it was so grand, there wasn't a single detail that was overlooked or not needed very urgently and very specifically within the sanctuary. And the brackets, yesh lomar b'derech efshar, and you could say, asher chalak v'prat shehu miyuter, ve'eno menutzel b'mishkan, de ikari mekadesh hu ma'ayin hachnasas hulin ba'azar, that if something extra was brought in that wasn't needed, that wasn't essential, it would be like bringing in something mundane into the holy space. V'zehu davar chol b'mishkan, and this would be something mundane in the Mishkan, meaning anything extra would actually be taking away, because every single thing that was in the Mishkan was essential and was needed and had a purpose and was there for a very specific reason. And if you're going to bring in some extra random things, it's taking away. And this principle that every single thing is essential, is utterly necessary, this applies to the wagons and the oxen that were part of the Mishkan. That they were forced, it was necessary that they had to be exactly as needed. Lo pachot, aval gam lo yoter, not less. That for sure, but certainly, but also not more. That there shouldn't be any aspect or anything additional that isn't absolutely necessary to the purpose that it has. Masah HaMishkan hen b'mida b'kamos sheish agalot b'midosehem hamidiyaket kinal. And the carrying of the Mishkan was done with the 6 wagons in an exact measurement, as we said above, where everything's lined up, placed exactly where it's meant to be, and put appropriately. Lo agalot rabot yoter, but lo agalot gadolo yoter, and not with any extra wagons, and not with any bigger wagons. V'chen b'mispar shnei asar habakar hamulichim asa agalot, and so too with the 12 oxen that had to pull all of this. Da'af shemasa hamishkan hu masa kaved beyoter, and that even though the Mishkan was very, very heavy, sarich yinatzlu b'shlemus kol hakoichos shel kol echad mishayim asar habakar hamolichem et ha'agalot. Nonetheless, they had to use all the strength of all 12 oxen that are pulling these wagons. So if you think about it, it's hard for me to picture the wagons exactly, but let's say you had 18 ox. So then you had, instead of 2 oxen per wagon, you had 3. So each one would have to work a little bit less. And maybe you would think that that's a better way to do things, that you're not going to wear out any of the oxen. But that's not what it's saying here. What it's saying here was that everything is exact and everything is essential and everything has to be used fully. So each of these 12 ox had to use all of its strength. And that was like decided, and that was worked out, and that was specifically done in this way, that nothing was extra. Even the reservoir of strength within the animal wasn't extra. Each one has to be used exactly for what it has. And if it had been bigger, the wagons had been bigger, or agalot rabot yoter, or just more wagons, not bigger ones. Azay lo zo bilvad shelo hayata tosefes zo chelek ma'asiyas hamishkan. Ella yetera mizo hagalot lo hayu bishirun hanachan. So not only would it be that this was extra and this was, additional to the wagon, to the Mishkan, but also that it wouldn't have been in precise measure. It had to be done precise. It had to be done exact. Ba'ad kidei kach dekara yetera ka mashmalo lana. Kol kesef hakalim gomer limach shehayu klei hamikdash mechunim b'mishkalo shokalim echad b'shokalim kulan kachad lo riba v'lo miat kulo. This concept was so important that it includes the specific phrase that all the silver utensils were used to show that they were precise. They were weighed individually or collectively, but it was exact what it needed to be. V'lahatir mehadin klei sharet ein makdishin ela melim, as it says that that these vessels would only be sanctified when they were full. That every vessel that had a cavity that needed to be filled had to be filled in order to be sanctified, to be used properly. That there wasn't anything extra. Seif Zayin. Ubefrat habiur hanal hu l'shitas hamedrash. Okay, remember we made a little divide between the medrash and the sifri. The medrash referred to all of the wagons and the oxen as a korban, but the sifri referred to it as a donation, a nidava. So now let's go back and talk about this concept. If the wagons and the oxen are not in the level of korban, but they are in the level of a donation. Okay, we already spoke about the medrash that considers all of this to be a sacrifice. And therefore it would be forbidden that anything should have extra that wasn't utterly needed. And that every aspect and every detail was needed for the Mishkan, as we already spoke about. Aval l'das ha-sifri, but remember, on the other hand, according to the opinion of the Sifri, va'al derech zeh leperush Rashi, which is the line of reasoning that Rashi quotes. Sheperush agalot v'habakar huvu lasat et hamishkan v'lo hidgishu bekach shilam geder korban, that the wagons and the oxen were brought to carry the Mishkan, but they're not put in the category of being an actual ritual sacrifice. We can still explain and understand exactly why we have the bare minimum and exactly what's needed with regard to the amount of wagons and cattle. The carrying of the Mishkan was one of the responsibilities of the Levies. As said in the beginning of the Parsha, Zos avados mishpachot hagershuni lavod v'lomasad. This was the service of the family of Gershuni to serve and to carry. Ba'al derech zeh b'bnei Merari v'zos mishameret mas'am l'kol avodasam ba'ol moed karshei hamishkan v'gomer. And so too with the family of Merari, they were charged to transport all of the beams in the Ohel Moed and the sockets and the beams, etc. Then move on, Kishe Sivo Kadosh Baruch Hu, Kach Mitam V'hayu Hagalot V'habakar Lavod et Avodas Ohel Moed V'natasotam El Halavim Ish Kafi Avodaso. As it says, Hashem commanded, take from within you, which means the wagons and the oxen, to serve the service of the Ohel Moed, of the temple, and give them to the Levi, each one for the work that he has to do. Hakavana bekach lo hayta lehafkia mi'yedei halevim. So the idea of this is not to take away from the work of the Levim, as avodas hamasa bekodesh, not to remove the work that they had to do of carrying the sanctuary. Shehi kedushas halevim, because this is what the Levim were sanctified to do. Below levatel et chiyu of halevim, and it wasn't to remove the obligation that they had. Ela chovas avodas hamasa hayita v'noteret mu mutelet al halevim b'shat te'ina chelke hamishkan al hagalot v'prikasa mehem. But rather, it was incumbent on the Levim to the loading and the unloading of the wagons in all of this transport. V'gam b'shah shayu hachalakim nitunim ba'aglot hayu halevim hochim achareim b'chulo. And as we said, and at the time when everything was loaded onto these wagons, the Levite would follow it behind and make sure that nothing fell and nothing slid. V'haglot lo hayu ela lahakel memaso. So it wasn't, the wagons weren't in order to lighten the task. And even more so, the wagons and the cattle were not what carried the Mishkan. So there's a little bit of a nuance here, but it's rather the Levi carried the Mishkan through the agency of the wagons. So it's not the wagons are carrying it, it's the Levi's carrying. The Levi's loading, he's unloading, he's following it, he's taking care of the whole job. He's the one carrying the Mishkan. He's doing it through the agency of the wagon. It's not that the wagon is carrying the Mishkan. Therefore, haskima dasan ladas hal yona. Therefore, again, as we quoted in the original Rashi that we looked at, which was based on the Sifri, this was in agreement to the supernal will of Hashem. Veheviu rak sheish agalot bichlal, and therefore only six. I keep doing that, but only 6 wagons were needed. Ad shayu avur hamasa hakaved divnei Merari rak arba agalot, and that was 2 for the Gershunis, and Merari had 4 wagons. Ki avodat hamasa muchrach lihiot beofen Sheben Levi Yelech Kol Haderach, because it had to be done in this way, because the work of carrying the Mishkan had to be done in a way that the Levi would run after would go after the wagons, Achareha Agala, B'yashkiach Aleha, and to supervise it. And when he would see the board slipping into the empty space, there was a little empty space between the wagons, he would go and fix that, as we explained in Seif Aleph. Ki halevim hem nisui hamishkan, because the Levi himself was carrying the Mishkan. And in order to make it easier to facilitate, it's probably a better word than easier in this context, they employed the usage of the wagons, but it's not the wagon that's doing the work. It's the Levi that's doing the work. Okay, so now let's go into the Horah, the exciting or the spiritual part, I guess. The whole thing is spiritual. I shouldn't throw my commentary over there. Okay, Seif Ches. The Horah mizeb avodas adam. So what do we learn from all this in my own service of Hashem? Amru Chazal. So let me just back up 1 second. So we said, according to the Medrash, the wagons and the oxen are all part of a korban, a sacrifice. And therefore, we continued, but we came to the conclusion that because they are part of a holy sacrifice, they nonetheless, they have to be exact. Every detail has to be utilized and done exact measurement. But then we said, according to the Sifri, they're considered a donation. They're not considered a korban in and of itself, but what we came up with is that they are there to facilitate the holy work of the Levi. So either way, it's extremely important that it's precise. V'hahora, so the lesson is, in my own service of Hashem, Amru Chazal, the rabbis, that the Chachamim say, Kol ma shebara HaKadosh Baruch Hu ba'olamo lo bara davar echad levatala. Every single thing that Hashem created in this world was created for an essential reason. He didn't create anything for nonsense, for nothing. Nothing is there by accident. V'chlal ze amor b'kol zvan v'kol makom b'kol chelke v'prate habriya. And this lesson we can learn in all times, in all places, in every single detail of creation. I'm gonna jump ahead a thought I had when I was preparing, and it's a little bit of a mundane thought, but I don't know if you ever bought furniture from IKEA or something like that, and you have someone who's not super equipped at building these things and they build it for you and it looks okay. And then they hand you a bag of pieces and they, oh yeah, the IKEA threw in like 50 extra pieces. So you know right away that they probably skipped some important steps. You don't have an extra bag of pieces in something like that. So, and not that I'm trying to make a comparison to the way Hashem created the world, but just a little visual that every single thing that was created, there's no extra pieces. Every single thing is important and has a purpose. Ba'asiyas HaMishkan, kasher niskayem basi laganuni. So in the building of the Mishkan, of the sanctuary, where we know this famous phrase that is said, come into my sanctuary, Hashem said, from Shir Shirim, Shela kol hachataim shegarmu at silu kashchina, that after all of the sins that were caused by the presence of Hashem, the Shechina removing itself from this world, Yarda Hashchina lamata be'eretz v'sharata, the Shechina came down and it wanted to dwell in the Mishkan, as it says, Vasuli mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham, the famous verse, make for me a sanctuary and I will dwell within them. So the famous question on this is the grammatical question. Why would it say, make a sanctuary and I will dwell within them? It switches from singular to plural. As explained, that it means that I will dwell within each and every individual. Azay begamar malachas hamishkan, as it's begamar, excuse me, as it says in the completion of the Mishkan, bal yedei gilui, shum prat eno levatala chas v'shalom. It's apparent that there's no detail that is for naught, that is that is meaningless. Ela kol prat v'prat minutzel b'shlemus latafgid she'ovro bara oto Hashem. But every single detail is utilized to its fullest for the purpose of why Hashem created it. This again goes back to those 12 oxen, that every single one of those oxen is utilized to its full capacity of strength. So even so, the general atmosphere of the sanctuary was in a way of wealth and splendor. It wasn't for just wastefulness, for just extravagance for the sake of extravagance, God forbid. But rather it was recognized that every single detail is fulfilling its ultimate purpose of creation. And therefore, it's understood that in order to transport the Mishkan, it's exactly enough to have exactly 12 oxen, v'b'sheish agalot, and 6 wagons, ba'orech v'rochav mesuyam, and with very, very specific measurements. Ein makom lahasif aleihem, and there's no room and there's no idea to add to it. B'masha yeshbo v'hoter yeshorach v'hefrach lishtamesh bo avor inyan echad b'mishkan. And every single thing that's there, that's permissible, that's allowed, we have an obligation to use it to its full capacity in the Mishkan. Or you could say to use it out, to use it out properly. I know that's not proper English, but it's a phrase people throw around a lot. Okay, so what about us? Each one of us in our own personal internal Mishkan. Kamaimer Razal, as the rabbis say, Al hapasuk v'asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham. The verse, make for me a sanctuary in the singular, and I will dwell within them in the plural. B'tocho lo nemar ela b'tocham. It doesn't say I will dwell within it, which would be the singular, but it says I will dwell within them, which the rabbis explain means b'toch kol echad ve'echad misrael, that Hashem is going to dwell within each and every single Jew. Ad heichan alav lehizaher shekol koach sheniten lo me'et hakadosh baruch hu, up until the point that the individual recognizes that every single strength that they have was given to them from Hashem. Ubechol pratav lo yelach levatala chas v'shalom, and not a single detail, not a single aspect was given for purposeless, for no reason, God forbid. Ella yenutzel b'shlemus letachliso v'tavkido Lishmo bara oto Hashem ani nivreti l'shamash koni. But rather, it's for the purpose of fulfilling the purpose and the reason, their reason for being, as it says, as Hashem says, or a person said, I was created for no reason other than to serve my creator. So anything that I have internal, any aspect of myself is for the very specific reason I was given it in order to utilize it. V'hadvarim omrim al koyach mikoichas nafsho. And this is said about a person's individual strengths. Alav ladas, you need to know. Shebashat shehu lomed Torah ve'eno mityagea kidabai. That when a person learns Torah, but they're not toiling in it as they should, einhu menatel kidabai esakayach lekach shenitan lo me'es Hashem. They're not utilizing the power and the strength that Hashem gave them. Ve'al derech zeh, the kol prat v'kishreinasav, and so too in every detail of your individual talents, sheyesh lenitzalam l'shem shamayim, that they should be utilized for the sake of heaven. V'lekiyum b'kol darkecha de'ehu, as we say, in all our ways you should know Hashem. B'shvil kiyum hamitzvahs v'behider dafka, in order to fulfill the mitzvahs, and it should be done in a way of hider, in a way of embellishment, in a good way. And specifically in order to spread Judaism outward. A person should use all of their capacities and all of their talents. Here's a great line that's coming up, and it maybe feels a little bit, got to sit up a little taller in your seat when you read this. V'al derech zeh bizman, and so too with time. How do we use our time? Afilu im mele esrim v'shalosh sha'ot v'chamishim v'teisha dakot. If on a certain day you already filled 23 hours and 59 minutes, shel hayoim me'es la'es, and you filled this time of the day, alav l'hishtadel shagam hadaka hayechida hanoteret lo talach levatala chas v'shalom. It's incumbent on you or on him to make sure that that last minute of the day does not get wasted, God forbid. Seif Tes on the last page. Vizohi hora hanilamedet min hamishkan. And this is the lesson that we get from the Mishkan. Shekasher yeshno davar miyutar she'eno mivsa es tafkidu b'shlemus. When there is something extra that's not being fulfilled completely, azay yesh chesron b'klalos asiyas hamishkan. This is actually a lacking in the completion of the sanctuary. V'memela yesh chesron chas v'shalom gam v'kiyum v'shachanti b'toichem. And so too, God forbid, it's as if there's a lacking in the ultimate goal of Hashem dwelling in this world. If there's something that's not being utilized, that's being put to the wayside. Kasher Yehudi machzir mashahu bin nitzel prat, when a Jew is lacking in utilizing some sort of a detail, but filu prat hachikatan, and even a small little detail, shebechelko ba'olam, of his personal or her personal space in this world, v'hadavar holach levatala chas v'shalom, and the thing gets wasted, some capacity gets wasted. Naisa al yedeze bilbul bebria so shel hakadosh baruch hu. This creates a mess up in the entire creation of the world from Hashem. Shelo bara be'olomo davar echad levatala. As we know that Hashem did not create anything in the world for naught, for meaninglessness, for just random, just throw it in, an extra bag of pieces at the end of making that furniture. V'kasher kol echad ve'echad menatzel as kol koicha sav l'kayem hamaymar anini vreti l'shamash as kaini. And when each and every individual is going to utilize all of their strengths and all of their talents in the capacity of that understanding that I was created for no reason other than to serve my creator, miskayim v'shachanti b'toichem. We will have fulfilled the divine will of I shall dwell within you. So first it's going to be fulfilled internally within me, within you, that every single thing is being utilized for Hashem. And through this agency, so too, it'll extend to the entire world. Shechen kasher kol prat b'bria yimala esat tafkid. So when every single detail of creation is going to fulfill its job and its purpose for which Hashem created it, Yiskala b'bria, b'kol chelek sheba ketzad hi bri'aso shel hakadosh baruch hu. You are going to reveal the entire purpose of creation within that small portion of that what Hashem created. You will reveal that in the supernal purpose for which it was created. And through doing this, if we can do this throughout the entire world, start internally with ourselves, but as we extend outward, we will merit the building of the third temple, Asher b'toicho yared hamishkan she'asa Moshe, which within it will come down, in the third temple will come down the Mishkan, the sanctuary that Moshe made in the desert, Shehu Kayim La'ad. As it says, the Mishkan, the sanctuary, will exist forever. Ha'ol, that's Kol Kalav V'Gomer, as the pasuk says. B'bayis hamikdash hashlishi, in the third base hamikdash, sheyabana b'mhera b'yameinu al yedei Mashiach Sidkenu, which will be built speedily in our days through Mashiach coming. V'lo ya'avor afilu rega echad levatala chas v'shalom, and not a single moment will pass with that isn't used properly. Ella kimei seitcha me'eretz Mitzrayim, but rather, you will leave Mitzrayim lo ichvam hamakom keheref ayin miyad mamish. And it just as we left Mitzrayim immediately, it will not take any time. It will happen immediately in our times. Thank you everyone for listening and for tuning in.
Thank you. Beautiful Sicha.
Thank you so much.
Could you just explain something to me?
Sure, I could try.
Try. What was the difference between it being carbon, like the difference of it being a krava or a nedava? Like where does
it's
like
the
where,
Sifri versus the Medrash. The Medrash calls it a korban, the Sifri calls it a nedava. So I think the difference is that the thing itself was holy versus the role of the Levium was essential.
but practically, what does that mean in the Sicha? Like, what are we learning from that? What's
It's a
the
side point. If you look through when I was preparing and I was looking, they refer to it in the English one, they actually refer to it as a side point, that the Rebbe goes into the side discussion about what was the
it
exact
doesn't
nature of it.
discuss why Rashi Dafka uses that and not that. The Rebbe doesn't deal with that.
Not that I understood. What I understood is that the Rebbe points out that there's two versions, but both lead to the same. That's
But
how I
he doesn't
understood
deal with it. It's not dealt with in this Sicha.
Not that I understood. It isn't to say if you learn with someone else and go get deeper and delve into the footnotes more. But from what I understood is that both of those are possible, but nonetheless, they lead back to the same point.
I was kind of like hung up on that. I was waiting for it to come out somewhere. And I'm like, okay, what's happening with that? Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Very nice. Thank
Thanks
you.
for tuning in. Thanks, everyone. I really appreciate that you're all here.